I can encourage you to grab a seat. I'm going to pray for Phil. Father, we thank you for this man. We thank you for all that he does. We thank you for the work of Hope into Action, Lord. And Father, we pray this morning, Lord, that as he communicates the heart of Hope into Action, what it's all about, Lord, that you would open hearts and ears, and Father, you would cause us to respond in the ways that you're asking us to be involved in. Father, we pray that as he opens the word, Lord, that it changes, that seeds would drop into our hearts that would bring about change in the name of Jesus. Amen. Thank you, my friend.
Amen. Thank you. Well, good morning, everyone. Good to see some very familiar faces, just scan across the room, and also good to see some new faces as well, which I'm not so familiar with, which is great to see. And for you guys, just to let you know, my name's Phil, and I now work for an organization called Hope into Action, but previous to that, I worked here at the People's Church. And I'm just, so thankful for Rob and Samara and the work that you're doing here, and it's just great to be here with you again this morning. And so Hope into Action. We're going to have a slide. Now, I'm terrible at reminding the person on the desk, who's Dawn today, to move the slides on. So if you think this looks like he's talking about this slide now, feel free to move it on. And if not, don't worry. Hope into Action. Well, first of all, just to let you know that as a church, the People's Church have now been partnering with Hope into Action for coming up to, if not already, 10 years. That's a decade anniversary, which has flown past, okay? And the reason why we were connected to Hope into Action is because it's because of the hope that we have in Christ to make a difference in people's lives. And it's great to see this morning that John and the team, I'm pointing there, the slide isn't there anymore. John and the team from NG Network heading off to Ghana, to the King's Village. Why? Because there was a hope that over in Ghana a difference could be made. That somehow the love of God and expertise in the medical practice could come together to make a difference in people's lives in Ghana. And in the same way, we always wanted to keep our eye, where can we be at work? And we were aware that here in the city of Nottingham, our home city, there was a need, and that need was homelessness. And for a long time, we thought maybe the best way that we could support homeless people was by connecting in with what was happening in the inner city. Places like Emmanuel House and the Friary, and we would take donations, collections, and raise awareness for what they were doing. And then I came across Hope into Action. And it was because of John Fahy, actually. And so came across Hope into Action and realized that we had a way of impacting people directly and being able to help and support here in our community. So what Hope into Action do is they offer supported accommodation for people who are vulnerable, people who are homeless, or whether that means that they were actually on the streets or maybe surfer surfing, they might be refugees, whatever the situation might be, that means that somebody doesn't have a permanent place of their own, that we could offer support to those people. And so if we move on, Dawn, what is our vision? So our vision is to see every church lovingly make a home for the homeless. Where did that come up? Can you actually see that? Don't worry, okay. If you can't see it, later on there's some information that you can take away. Okay, so you don't have to get your theatre binoculars out just yet. Our story came about, the story of Hope into Action came about because in 2010, our founder, who's a guy called Ed Walker, he had been working for Tear Fund, okay, over in Africa, and he'd come back to the UK after many years working out there, and he'd got a job with the YMCA, and he was sitting in Peterborough, and in a park bench. Now, just beware what might happen when you sit on a park bench and you're open to what God is saying. And he sat on a park bench watching his kids play, and there was a guy sitting next to him, and he got chatting with him. And he found out that guy that morning had been released from prison and had nowhere to go. He had no one to go to, and no money, no job, no resource to help him. And so Ed said, don't worry, I'm sure I'll be able to find you somewhere. And he began to ring around, and he couldn't find anywhere where he was able to get this guy some support. And as he was ringing around trying to find out, is there anywhere we can stay tonight in the city of Peterborough? He could see churches on the horizon. And he thought, surely the church can help in this situation. And it was from this moment that Hope into Action was born. And so so his vision was to see every church lovingly make a home for the homeless. To mobilize, and how we do that is our mission is to mobilize, unite, and unleash Christian prayer. That's where it starts. Investments, because houses cost money. Did you notice this? Okay. Investments and donations, and then relationships, bringing the church together, inspired. And so that's how it starts off, with just one man and a vision and a hope that actually God can make a difference in one person's life. And so, if we move on, Dawn. And so where are we today? Well, across the nation, we now have 116 houses. I say 116, that's probably outdated from when this was put up a couple of months ago, and I'll explain a little bit about that in a minute. So 116 houses across mainly England. We have some in Northern Ireland, and we're creeping up to Scotland. We're as far as Northumbria at the moment. Okay. We've got 110 partner churches. You guys are a partner church. Okay, you support a house, so you are a partner church. We work in 35 towns and cities. And last year, we housed 486 people. So that's 486 people who were taken off the streets or out of temporary accommodations, such as bedsits and hotels, and have a permanent place to call their own. Okay? And all of that has taken an investment of around about £28 million. Take a sharp intake of breath there. Okay. So in Nottingham, how does that transfer to Nottingham? Well, in Nottingham, we currently have 11 houses. So of those 116, oh, they've gone. 116, we have 11. We have 2 about to open, and we have 1 that this week an offer was accepted on. So there's going to be a further 3 houses opening in Nottingham. Now, depending on, because some of our houses are family houses, we have houses for families, we have houses for single men, and we have houses for mother and baby houses. Okay, so depending on how big families are, we can, when we're at full occupancy, we're housing anywhere between 30 and just over 40 people. Okay, so that's the number of people that we're working with in Nottingham. We also have 8 partner churches that we currently work with. And so over the 10 years, the house here that you support is for single men. And we have seen men come into that house, completely different circumstances and situations, but leave to go on, more often than not, I'm really pleased to say, to have their own permanent place and live independently. And then really importantly, to hold on to those places as well. If I tell you very briefly, the very first tenant that we ever had in. Okay, so I'm not going to use names while I'm speaking here, so really, if you hear any name, I've changed it. Okay, so the very first tenant we ever had in here had never had his own place. He'd either surfed with his, did I say surfer surfed? Sofa surfed. That's what I wanted to say. Well, that didn't sound right. With relatives or friends. He'd been on the streets a number of years. He'd never, ever had his own place, and he was in his 40s. He'd been a drug user previously, which had meant that he had his own sort of mental health issues. But he'd got to the point where he was on the streets, he'd been there too long, and he was just desperate for a change. And he was the very first tenant that we had here in this house. And he was, should we say he was a character? He was very funny, okay? And I'm really pleased to say that he was with us about 9 months before he moved on to his own flat. And every now and again, I still bump into him. That was 10 years ago. He's still got his own flat. He didn't have his own place until he was in his 40s, but he still maintained his own. Why? Because of the support that he received, not just from Hope into Action, but here at People's Church. And he still asks about people, how's such and such, how's such and such. He remembers. Okay, so if we move on, Dawn. So we'll find that within sort of the work of homeless, fighting against homelessness, there's sort of all sorts of ways in which this can be done, from intervention to recovery to prevention. And all of these are really important. They're all needed. And we find that we kind of link in with different organizations. You guys know Paul Trainer, Streets for Christ. Yeah, so his work is different. He goes onto the streets and is there with the guys. We're at the sort of opposite end of the spectrum, where we're offering supported accommodation. And so all of these aspects are really important, but we put our focus as Hope into Action in the supported accommodation. So what that means is there is a house where people have their own room. If it's a house for single men, they have their own room, their own bedroom, a living room, and then a shared kitchen and bathroom and facilities. And every week, they will have a support worker, someone on the ground who will go and work face-to-face with these people, just helping to make sure that everything that they need, whether it's a program that they're on or that the benefits are right, or if they're working towards getting a job, we just really come alongside and help them in all aspects of that. And the funny thing is that when I used to go down as a volunteer from the church, as the friendship group, the friendship and support group, I used to sit with what is called the empowerment worker. Okay, that's what we call our support workers. We want to empower people to move on from a place where they are into a good, positive direction, to take good steps. We're not there to do everything for them. We want to empower them to do it for themselves. And I remember sitting sometimes and listening to the work that Sarah, a fellow empowerment worker, used to do, and think to myself, oh, I'm so glad I'm not doing that. Oh, I'm glad I'm sitting on this side and just come to have a cup of tea and they're chatting with them. And then fast forward all these years. And do you know what I think now? I'm so glad I'm doing this. It's funny how God sort of works and brings us to different points, hey? So even if you're sitting here now thinking, well, this kind of thing sounds a bit hairy, scary for me. I don't know if I want to be involved. Just let God be at work in your hearts. That's all I'm saying. Just be open. So all of this is needed. So how does it work as far as Hope into Action is concerned? Shall we go forward? So first of all, we look for investors, people who are willing to share their wealth. Okay? That might be an individual. It might be a group of people who come together to say, we'd love to buy a house. And then what we do is we work on a term where for 5 years they loan their wealth. And we'll invest that in property. We then look after that property on like a 5-year term. And every 5 years we see, do you need to have this property back? Or can we keep it for another 5 years? And so that's how our investment is made. And I've got to say that already in 2024, I have took one phone call where I picked up the office phone and said, hello, Hope into Action. And someone said, hello, I'd like to buy you a house. They're good phone calls to receive. And so that's where one of our houses, our new houses, is coming from, that phone call. So we look for investors. We then go out and look for a suitable house. And every house that we open is connected to a church. We don't open a house until we have a church partner, either a new partner in a particular area, and then we'll look for a house in that area, or whether it's an existing partner who'd say we'd like another house. Okay, so we look for suitable houses that are affordable and in the right sort of location. And then we have a referral process where we look for the tenants who are coming in. Now, we sort of have a bandwidth. We need people who need a degree of support. Okay, so, but we also, there are certain people who we know is beyond our professional expertise. And so we're looking for people who come in the right sort of bands, because we know that's the people we can help. The people beyond us, there'll be other organizations that can help there, and the people who don't need our support, we can forward them on to organizations which are more likely who can support those. And so we then look for tenants, and then we come alongside them to offer the support, but we always do that in partnership with the church. That's you guys, okay? And at every step of the way, Hope into Action is involved in all of that process. So we have people in our support office who are sort of there designated to work with the investors and the finance side of things, people who are experts in the housing, estate agents and the like who help with that whole process of making sure that everything's done in the correct way. And then, of course, we work in each office to make sure that the tenants are correct, and then we come and for the churches who are supplying the friendship and support group, that's the volunteers who will actually go down and work with the tenants. We offer training and support there as well. So we sort of oversee every step of the process, but want to do this very much. It's our heart and our aim to do this in partnership with the church. Thanks, Dawn. And what we really want to do as an organization is mix professional excellence with spiritual passion. We want to be an organization which in the decades to come keeps our Christian roots and identity. We're aware there are many charities out there that do a fantastic work that was started by Christians and Christian organizations, but over the years have lost that identity of being Christ followers. And more often than not, that it comes down to money quite often. Okay? And our focus at the minute is to make sure that we maintain our spiritual passion. We want to be upfront about the fact that we are Christians and that we partner with the church in everything that we do. But we want to make sure that we do that with a professional excellence. Why? Because that is how we're going to see a difference in people's life. Okay? There's got to be a professional expertise, okay? And so that's what we offer, and we ask that you as the church come alongside and just be a good neighbor. Can everyone just say good neighbor? Good neighbor. Okay, good neighbor. And so one of the things which, so Ed Walker, who is the guy, our founder, 2 years ago, he stepped down and we had a new CEO come in who's a great guy called John Kurt. And his mantra, for want of a better term, okay, is grace and truth, okay? What he wants us to see, to maintain our professional excellence and our spiritual passion, is that we come alongside people with grace and truth. And so I've got to mention it today, because John always mentions grace and truth. That's at the heart of what we do. And so, because we know that when we are high on grace and high on truth, that's when we see transformation in people's lives. If you just want to move on, Dawn. See, grace and truth are sort of like the two sides of the coin of support that we offer people. And we know that we need both of these things. Yes, people need unconditional acceptance. People are coming to us in all sorts of situations and circumstances. People who believe themselves they don't deserve a second chance quite often. And yet, that's the grace side, but there's also the truth side that says, but there are rules to living in this house. If you break these rules, there will be consequences, which could be at some point that you're asked to leave, eviction, okay? So we know that when we put up when we have the invitation with grace, but the barriers of truth, that is the way that we help see people move forward into transformation. Thanks, Tom. Because when people come to us, this is a diagram that if you ever come on our training, you'll see this diagram of the tree. And very often what we will see of people is the leaves of the tree. And we call that their behaviors, okay? We refer to those as their leaves. You might look at some of what you can see of their life, the leaves that they've got, and think, why are you behaving like that? Why would you make those choices? Why did you have that outburst? Why can't you see this? And that's easy to do, isn't it? Have we ever looked at anybody and thought that when they've done something? And what we want to delve down into is actually the roots of their life. Actually, it's the roots which feed and produce that fruit and those leaves. It's the roots that are going to show us why do you have the behaviors that you do? What can we do to intervene and to help with grace and truth to see the leaves of your tree change, the behaviors of your tree change, so that we can see good fruit come into your life, to see you moving in a good direction, to see transformation come. And as I said before, we see a whole spectrum of people. In just the house that you support here, I've sat down with people in the same room, different tenants as time has gone on, from the very first tenant, the guy who had never had anywhere to live, through to a guy who was a professional who just 5 months earlier had been working full time and was sitting down on the bed saying, I can't believe I'm here. What happened? And the whole spectrum of everyone in between we see. But what we do find, if you just put it, was that it, Don? Would you just go back one more? Oh, wait, is it? Okay. Okay, don't worry. What we do find is that in every circumstances there are sort of similar things, and that is that there's not just a poverty of resource, i.e. not having access to money or items that you might need, but there's also a poverty of relationships, people that you haven't got to turn to. And there's also a poverty of identity, not realizing sort of the worth of who you are. And those three things often, regardless of the circumstances, that is what we're often working with. It's not just a poverty of resource, but a poverty of relationships and a poverty of identity. As we come alongside people, again, with truth and grace, that is what we want to work with and to see restored. Not just resources, but relationships, which is where the church comes in and is key, but our identity. And as Christians, we know that our identity is key, how we see ourselves. And when we see ourselves as a father and daughter of the King, how transformative is that? So that's a little bit about how we work. But does it work? Is that the next slide? Okay, great. So at the back, along with the books, which are there, available for you to see, we also have our sort of impact report from the last year. And you can read about, does this work? And if I just choose a couple of things just to highlight it. The thing which Kate, who is our head of network, is always really looking into is the abstaining from crime. From those who have come from a criminal past or straight out of prison, we see that 94% of our tenants don't reoffend while during their term with us. Now, if you look at the statistics for what that is, generally, that is a massive leap. Absolutely massive. And if we can keep people out of that rotating door of prison, we're on to seeing transformation in their life. If I tell you a quick story about one of the tenants, again, from the house which you supported, he came out of prison. Because of his prison sentence, he'd lost his family. A lot of his friends had turned their backs on him. He had no one to go to. Okay? We find that he couldn't find work. He was struggling there. He had no resource. He was just so down in himself. We put him into the house, and we had two things that happened really well. Number one, a great friendship and support team who came alongside him. But also the tenant in the house, the other tenant, they just got on so well. And it became like a father and son relationship. It was great to see. And this guy moved on to get his own place. And then I heard that he'd got a job as well, and that he'd been reunited with his family and was be able to see his kids again. Why? Because he could have his own place where it was suitable to see his children, and it was safe to do that. And he had a regular, steady income. And I was so pleased for him. And I used to see him, just bump into him from time to time. How are you doing? You still working? Yeah, still working. Still got the place? Yeah. Still seeing the kids? Yeah. And, and I'm sure that within that, he's having his ups and downs, but he's dealing with it. And he's dealing with it in such a way that he's maintaining his life. Great to see. The very first, when I move over to work for Hope into Action, I've done some training, and I'm sent out on my very first referral to meet a potential new tenant. Okay, so I don't tell him it's my first one, but I sit down with him, and I'm looking at his referral form and doing the work that we do. And the first thing he does when he sits down, he says, I've bought my referral form, but I've also got another one here. And I thought, what's this? And he puts down a scrap of paper. And on it is a note saying, this guy should come to you. And then there is a name. And I look at this name and think, I recognize that name. And I said, who's this? What's this come from? And he said, well, in the hotel where I've been staying, and he was having to leave this hotel, He was a refugee who'd received his permission to stay, and so you only get 7 days then before you have to leave your home office accommodation. So he's desperately trying to find somewhere, and he'd been telling the night receptionist about his problems. And this night receptionist said, "Do you know what? I was in a situation once where I needed some help, and these guys helped me. I'll just write here their name and my name and tell them that I sent you." And it was the tenant who lived just down the road who got a job. He got a job as a night receptionist in the hotel and was now telling a new potential tenant, "You need to go and see these guys." That other guy has now, he's gone on to find property of his own. And I just bumped into him last week. He's working part-time at a place quite close to where I live. And so I see him quite often still. And he told me, "I'm going to do my HGV license next week." I'm like, "Brilliant, let me know how it goes." Okay, just from a guy who had landed in the country, didn't even know English when he arrived. You see the transformation in his life. So, little stories of transformation. If you want to see, does it work? The results are there from the last year alone. Pick up one of these, take them away. It'll just keep you informed as to the work that we do. What's next, Dawn? Okay, would you like to see a little video? This might work, it might not. Shall we see what happens when we press the button? No. I guess that's a no from Ian in Coventry then. The good news is, if you go onto our website or YouTube, you will find these videos there. Okay. Do you want to, will it move on at all, Don? Oh, there we go. Okay, it's definitely not going to play. Okay. So how can you guys, that was the story of Ian from Coventry. If you go onto YouTube, put Hope into Action, you'll find his story right there. Okay. How can you be involved? Well, there's a little flow chart there which you can't read, can you? Okay. So if we just go on again, Dawn, let's just have a quick look, see if this is better. Can anyone read this one? Yeah. Okay. So at the top end of the spectrum, we've got Hope into Action. The UK support is at the top. And then the next level of support is the empowerment workers, those people who are on the ground, like myself. A friendship and support group coordinator, that is somebody in the church who connects Hope into Action and can inform the church of what we're doing and saying at that point. And then the other is the church leader. That's Rob Silmara. Okay? If we just go on again. This is where you guys can really come into your own when it comes to it being involved in the work of Hope into Action. Don't worry about the admin role. That's more for our franchisers. And we don't need to go into this, but you're not a franchise here. But what we could really do with, and what's really helpful, is what we call a home team. That is, from time to time, we need some work doing in the houses. It might be that there's a new tenant coming in. We might like to make the place look as good as new for them. You know, do the bed up nice, leave them a card, make sure it's all cleaned and tidy and ready to go, that everything that's in the house is that's needed, you know, whether it's chest of drawers or a TV stand or whatever it is, that it's all there, that the room is ready to go when somebody moves in. It might be that during the summer, particularly if the gardens are big, we get a chance to just say, let's have a day just gardening and making it look really great. It might be just we want to do a spring clean and just come, and it's a way of coming alongside. We do this with the tenants and, you know, getting to know them a little bit, showing your face to them. So if you could be part of the home team, that's periodically that's going to happen. It might be, it varies from house to house, but it's being on call just to be a help. It might be that you want to be part of the tenant support, our friendship and support group. That is just somebody who is going to be the good neighbor who will go down, visit on a regular basis. Again, this depends on what the tenant really wants. It might be just to sit down for an hour and have a cup of tea with them. It might be that you discover you've got a similar interest and you go and do that together. But it's just coming alongside, offering that relationship to them. And again, as each tenant comes in, it's always slightly different. What we like to see is a handful of people, 5, 6 people. And then depending on the tenant, we would just use a couple of those 5 or 6. So you won't be used all of the time, okay? And as this church supports a male house, generally, we ask that that would be male support as well. So men, I'm looking for you particularly at this point. Okay. And finally, the prayer team. You know, at the center of everything we do is prayer. Be involved. We quite often have prayer days, which if you can't get to the actual events, we do online. Be involved, okay? We'll keep you informed, and you're all very welcome to come and be involved in those things. If you've got somebody who connects, the coordinator, who can share with what's going on, keep us in your, whenever you meet to pray, particularly if it's into missions or the like, or local work. Keep us in your prayers. Keep yourselves up to date with things like this. See what we're doing, okay? And that's something which really everyone, I would hope, can be involved in. Because why? Because we want to see people's lives transformed. Right. Okay. So, we just move on, because
what I love about it is it's a perfect mix of the
works.
practical help and the practical support for people, and also the spiritual support and just the friendship. The tenant who I've been getting to know the most, he's recently just moved out, and I remember one of the first few times I met him, he was very nervous. Over the year, he's really kind of grown in his confidence and has really opened up his life to me, really, and that's been really, really nice to see. It can be challenging sometimes, you know, working with quite messy lives and quite messy situations. I think you have to have a lot of empathy and just really try and put yourself in their shoes and imagine what it's like being them. I've also learned a lot about what it's like to be homeless and to be in that uncertain position of really having to count every penny and not knowing how you're going to pay your bills. And it's been a real kind of reality check, I think, for me, of remembering what it's like for so many people. It's grown me in my faith, and I think it's grown me in my character. These skills will stay with you your whole life, really, of these just foundations of the Christian faith, allowing us to do, you know, what Jesus sent his church to do, to really share him and his message, and also just welcome people into Christian community.
I wasn't expecting the video to work, so that was part of the friendship and support team, who were just a member of the church who just volunteered to go and visit the house. That's actually in Norwich, where that church was working there. So just a little bit of insight as to what that guy had learned, not just about working with tenants, but about himself as well as he did that. So, if you want to keep up in touch with what we do, you can sign up for the newsletters and prayer and everything. Scan the QR code that's there at the back as well, or you can go on our website and find that information. Okay, thanks, Dawn. Okay, so in sort of response as to what we do as to Hope into Action and how we partner with the church, I had the question of who is my neighbor? If we're asking the church to be a good neighbor to our tenants, then the question, who is my neighbor, sprang to mind. And I'm just going to read to you from Luke chapter 12, chapter 10, verse 30 to 37. And it's a story which I'm sure you're all very familiar with, okay? And the context of this story is that somebody has come to Jesus and said, you know, what are the two most important, what's the most important law to follow? And Jesus said, well, he gives two. He doesn't give one, he gives two that he doesn't separate. He said the first is to love God with all your heart, all your soul and all your mind, all your strength. And the second is to love your neighbor. And the man who's sort of debating and sharing with him says, yeah, but who is my neighbor? He asked this question. Who is this person that I'm supposed to love as I love myself? And in response, Jesus tells this question. So it says, in reply, Jesus said, a man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho when he fell into the hands of robbers. They stripped him of his clothes, they beat him and went away, leaving him half dead. A priest happened to be going down the same road, and when he saw the man, he passed by on the other side. So to a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, he passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, as he traveled, came to where the man was. And when he saw him, he took pity or compassion or mercy, depending on the translation that you read. He took pity, compassion, mercy on him. He went to him, bandaged his wounds, poured on oil and wine. And then he put the man on his own donkey and took him to an inn, took care of him. The next day he took out 2 silver coins and gave them to the innkeeper. Look after him, he said, and when I return, I will reimburse you any extra expenses you may have. Which of these do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of robbers? The expert in the law replied, the one who had mercy or pity or compassion on him. Jesus told him, go and do likewise. Now, the chances are, if you've been a Christian for anything longer than 5 minutes, you've heard that story, yes? It's probably one of the most famous parables that Jesus told, and maybe one of the most famous stories in the Bible. It's sort of translated into our sort of modern culture, hasn't it? If we hear of a good Samaritan, we know what that is, even if we don't recognize that it comes directly from this story. A Samaritan is somebody who comes alongside and helps somebody. Even our sort of national helpline is called the Samaritans, okay, directly relating to this story. And compassion, which is at the center of this story. What is it? Well, if you wanted a sort of a dictionary definition, it's a profound human emotion prompted by the pain of others. More vigorous than empathy, which is understanding how someone feels, the feeling commonly gives rise to an active desire to alleviate someone else's suffering. It is often, though not inevitable, the key component in what manifests in the social context as altruism, helping those around us. Did you all remember that definition? I can't remember what dictionary I got that from, but that's a big definition, isn't it? But it's more than empathy. Empathy is understanding what someone is going through. Compassion is standing with somebody in that pain. It's coming alongside somebody in their pain. The word passion is associated with pain. If we hear the passion of the Christ, okay, it's to do with suffering of the Christ. If you're passionate about something, what you're saying is, even if I have to suffer for this, I'm still going to do it. If you're a brilliant singer, you might make other people suffer. I don't know. I was just thinking, why have I gone on to this? If you're a brilliant singer, okay, you'll go through that hours and hours and hours of singing if you're passionate about it. You know, why? Because that's what you want to do. You'll put yourself through it. And so when we have compassion, it's about going beyond what we want just for ourselves and wanting to do something to alleviate the pain or the suffering of somebody else. And the story of Hope into Action really starts with a moment of compassion. It's Ed sitting on a park bench, listening to some guy's story. Instead of saying, I get where you're coming from. See you later. From a point of compassion, he's thinking, what can I do? What could I actually do? Not to just sit here for 2 minutes with this man, but to walk alongside with him, to move him from a place of where he is into a positive place where he's ready to move on into something better. And in this story that Jesus tells, where he's explaining what is it? Who is my neighbor? When he's answering that question, he tells us a story which hinges on compassion. So if we maybe go on a slide, Dawn, let's have a look at this. What happens at the beginning of the story? Okay, one more. Is it there? Is that it? Try one more.
Click on the slide one.
Oh, okay, go back one. We've got a blank slide. Okay. So, what we see at the beginning of the story is that a man, he's beaten and he has things taken from him. Okay? He's robbed and left for dead. He has his possessions taken from him, he has his dignity and his health taken from him. Everything is taken from him at the beginning of the story. That is the first, there he goes, robbed and injured, okay? That's the first part of the story. In the second part of the story, we see that a priest passes by. Now, you all were very polite as you listened to this story. But I'm imagining that as Jesus told the story, they're kind of on the edge of their seats going, ooh, a priest passes by, okay? Weighing up every moment of this. And we're kind of so familiar with this story. But as I was looking into this, I was seeing that actually, for this priest to stop and help, it's not very convenient for him. There were strict rules of the day to what would happen if you touched a dead body. This guy's been left for dead. You know, he's probably on his break coming down from Jerusalem to where the priest would stay. That's what the Jericho Road was often used for if a priest was coming by. He'd done his shift at the temple, he's heading home. And for him to get involved there, if this is a dead body, if he touches something that's unclean, plaster's unclean, there are all sorts of rituals that he would go through. It might end up with him having to rent his robes at some point. It's not always convenient to be compassionate. And so this man passes by. Next up, we see the Levite pass by. And the Levite, it would have probably been a helper of the priest. Would have probably been learning from him and supporting him in what he does. How often do we learn from those in front of us and what they do? If the priest passed by, then I guess I can pass by. And I often think to myself, you know, if people look at a church and say, well, if the church can pass by, maybe we can pass by. Okay, what happens next? This is where there would have been a big gasp from the audience, okay? The last person in the world that they would expect to help was the Samaritan. Why? They were essentially arch enemies, okay? These two would not even speak generally, let alone stop to help when a priest and a Levite has already passed this man by. And what he does is he acts with compassion. It says that he saw him and he took pity, or he had compassion or mercy on him. He decided that he would intervene into this moment. And this compassion acts as like a hinge in the story. This is where everything changes. This man is the man who's been robbed is going in one direction at this minute, and that is towards death. He's been left for dead, bleeding, naked, dying. But when the moment of compassion comes, we see how what's being done to him starts to be undone. So what does he do? Thanks, Don. He says, first of all, his wounds are treated. What happens after that? He's transported to a place of safety. He puts him on the donkey and he takes him over to the inn. And then what does it say? It says, he says to him, I've got someone here for you to look after. Here's 2 coins. I'm going to go away for a while. When I come back, whatever you need, I will reimburse. So at the beginning of the story, we see that he's robbed and injured. At the end of the story, we see generosity and healing. We see compassion undoing all that was done to the man. Okay? Compassion is the hinge in the story. And whenever I hear this story, I can't help but go back to a moment in my own life when I was doing some schools work in what was called Top Valley School at the time, but is now called Parkview. Have I got that right? Park Vale. I always get it wrong. I was doing some work in Park Vale, and we'd had something called the Jesus lorry. Okay? Oh, no, Jesus bus. It was called the Jesus bus, but when it turned up, it was an articulated lorry. Okay? And over the course of the week, we had every member of the school come in for a session where they were taught the parables of Jesus. And it was all done in this really interactive session. When you go into the back of the bus, it was like this really great classroom setup. Everyone had their own screens, and they would work through a program which would sort of, in a sort of modern way, give meaning to the parables and how they relate to the Christian faith and today. And one of them was the parable of the Good Samaritan. And on one day, which happened to be Remembrance Day, it was the 11th of November, one of the guys who was involved in the churches in the area in getting this the Jesus bus to come into the school, he said to me, is it all right if I share at the end of the parable of the Good Samaritan? I'm like, yeah, be my guest, because I'd probably done it 20 times already that week. And so he stood up to talk, to bring some sort, to tie up the end of this story. And before he spoke, he had a bag and he brought out some like old desert goggles and some gloves and like a drinking container. And these were obviously all very old, and they looked like army items. And the last thing he brings out is a diary. And he explains that he was an old fella, this man was, okay? And he explained that his grandfather fought in World War I. And as it was Remembrance Day, he wanted us to sort of hear this story of his grandfather. And he opened up the diary, and he was showing us sort of entries in the diary for 1918, okay? And there was various things about what they were doing. There were just very short inserts into the days. But there was a day in October where it just had 3 letters at the top, which was OTT. That was it. And then there's no other entries afterwards. And he said, do you know what OTT means? And a few people are nodding their head here. OTT means over the top. It was when the soldiers who were in the trenches would actually go over the top of the trenches and they'd try and advance, okay? They were essentially like cannon fodder. And I think it was October the 18th, this grandfather was going over the top. And there was no other entries, and there's silence in the room. And he said what happened was his grandfather ran over the trenches. He got a certain distance and was shot in the leg, collapsed on the floor. And they were told, if you're injured, just stay where you are. Just lay low. At some point when the fighting's over, we will send medics out. And apparently the hours went on. This was like early in the morning when this had happened. And the day went on, and there were men all around lying injured, dying. And he painted a horrific scene. And it got to the evening time, and still no medic had come. But this guy was sort of, he couldn't move. He'd been shot in the leg, and he didn't know what to do. And then he said he saw one man. We can move on, Dawn. We saw one man coming towards him, sort of dotting around, bending down, giving people things, standing up, moving on to the next man, shaking them. Are they still alive? Giving them something, moving on. And eventually this man arrives at the grandfather, and he sees his leg, and he looks around, and he finds some sticks or something. He made him a splint for his legs. And he went into his pocket, and he gave him what he'd been giving everyone else, which was a sugar cube, just for some energy. Gave him the sugar cube, stands him up, points at a road, sends the man on his way. And he said throughout the whole experience, the medic never says a word. Nothing. And he said, do you know why that was? The reason was the medic was a German soldier. And so this moment of compassion where this man's life is saved. Why? Because this German medic decides, I'm going to intervene anyway. I'm going to come alongside you in your pain. And basically this man was saying, because of that medic, not only did he save my grandfather's life, but he's the reason I'm here today. The family line would have ended if that man hadn't have survived. And I was seeing, as he was telling this story, a literal moment of compassion, hinging a story, changing a life. When we come alongside people, we don't always know the impact we're going to have. And I also caveat this story with saying we can't help and change every situation. And there's a degree of sort of wisdom we need to use within all of this. But when we come alongside with someone with compassion, we're essentially bringing that opportunity to bring change. If you're wondering, who's my neighbor then? Who should I help? Well, Jesus kind of flips the question a little bit. What Jesus ends by saying is this. The better question really is this. Who will you be a neighbor to? Jesus says that is the question. And if you're moved by compassion and you think that actually I could come alongside some men and have a cup of tea with them once a week, I could sit with them in whatever position they are and find out what their interests are and maybe see if we can do something together. It might seem something very little. It might just be a sugar cube and a stick. But sometimes that's life-changing in itself when it's mixed with compassion. And so I want to encourage you today to just ask that question. Who will I be a neighbor to? As Hope into Action, we look to the church to come and be the good neighbor to every tenant that we support. Thank you for the 10 years that you've already given. And we look forward to moving forward and seeing many more tenants come through our house, becoming the real life statistics that we read in here of people having their lives changed and transformed. God bless you all.
Amazing. Can we stand?